Teachers of Reddit, what's the most embarrassing thing you've accidentally said done in class? As a camp counselor, I was kind of absent-minded when the kids were telling me stories one day. One told me that he had fainted once from heat stroke. While listening, I was thinking out loud and said, what if you actually died that day and we're all actually just waiting in purgatory? There was an awkward silence and the boy said, May. I don't like that. Edit. Spelling. I'm currently a teacher, but my favorite embarrassing teacher story originates with my cousin, who taught middle school. She had recently had a baby and was breastfeeding, so she pumped at school on her breaks. One day during her planning period, she shut her classroom door and covered the window so she could pump. While she has one of her boobs flopped out of her shirt, she felt the urge to fart, so she just let one rip. That's when she heard a muffled sound from the back of the classroom. She had completely forgotten about one of her male students staying in the room through recess to finish a test. She said she apologized profusely, but the poor boy refused to look her in the eye or speak, and he didn't for the rest of the year. My nose was super clogged from a head cold, and I hate blowing my nose in front of my students. I have a closet in the back of the room that I escaped to release some of the pressure. At home, my husband and I joke that when I blow my nose it feels like parts of my brain are coming out too from all the pressure release. One thing led to another, and I casually mentioned I was heading to the closet to blow my brains out. The students were understandably concerned. Recently I said D instead of pieces while reading of Mice and Men aloud to a class of 9th grade boys. I work at a Catholic school. One kid's response was simply, nice. I had a group of lazy AP kids a few years ago, and at progress report time, about 2/3 were failing. I read them the riot act explaining that I wouldn't round up their grades at the end of the quarter to a D just so they'd pass. I kept saying, I'm not going to just give you the D. You need to earn the D. The kids held out the first 2 times I said it, but the third they started giggling and I heard it and we all laughed to the point of crying. Ugh. It was worse than the time I said I was going to Netflix and chill with my cat one weekend because I didn't know what that meant yet. I'm a woman in my early 30s. Thanks for gold. By the way, I'm glad I could make you laugh. I'm a professor at a university, and I know this doesn't exactly answer the question, but 5 minutes ago I let my class go 30 minutes early because I felt a huge fart coming. In band rehearsal once, I accidentally passed gas. One of my tuba players nearby heard it and tooted a low BB on the tuba, matching pitch. We both just looked at each other and laughed. Not so much embarrassing as confusing and concerning. But while I was student teaching last semester, I was on the sidelines as the students were doing a quiz or something and accidentally said duck under my breath. Student who was walking by heard me, so I started apologizing profusely, to which they responded, that's okay. That's not even the worst thing I've heard you say. I have no idea what I said and they would not give me any other details. I still think about it sometimes. I'm a PE teacher at an elementary school. We were in the middle of a gymnastics unit and I was demonstrating a forward roll for a 3rd grade class. When I flipped, I saw something pink fly out of my pants leg out. It was a pair of my daughter's underwear that must have clung to the inside of my pants when I got them out of the dryer. I picked them up before any of them really noticed exactly what they were. Accidentally called a student mom. The other teachers made fun of me and took my ascot. The most embarrassing thing I said was during student teaching. I used to have a terrible habit of blurting out the same response to certain question statements. Things like you're dumb in response to that's dumb, etc. But I kept it in check while I was in school. Except this time. One day a kid asked me where my jacket was and I said what I always said when someone asked me where something was: I sold it for drug money. I felt like an idiot as soon as it came out of my mouth. I did more embarrassing things, but that's probably the most embarrassing thing I said. Saying orgasm instead of organism is a timeless classic. I was showing a class of 8th graders how to make something out of clay, and as I was demonstrating I said, now slap your balls back and forth in your hands. I mean, I taught middle schoolers, so my embarrassment never lasts. But lordy, did that turn my face red. We were discussing love at first sight as we read Romeo and Juliet in a 9th grade class. I asked them how much looks matter. They agreed looks matter a lot. I meant to say, you don't normally look across the mall and say, whoa, I bet she's got a good personality. I actually said, you don't normally look across the mall and say, whoa, I bet she gives good personality. Clearly not what I should have said. Was reading a story about the Victorian era where the word corset was used. Kids didn't know what that was, so I trotted over to the LED projector hooked to my laptop and googled corset. Yeah, my mind was in the Victorian era, but Google was in Victoria's Secret. All those images, many of them with full nips showing, just got blown up across the wall of my classroom, and that's when the principal walked in for my quarterly evaluation. Once when I was still subbing, I covered a health class for high school freshmen. The teacher had me play a video about the dangers of smoking. One of the kids asked, "Mister, you ever smoked?" Without thinking, I said, "Tobacco? No." Teacher had a smart board, was teaching lesson, finished, sat down, forgot his computer was still hooked up and went to his email, opened a chat, and began to ask whoever it was for another whole picture. He got fired 2 years later for something else. This one's my mom's story. She has a lot of allergies, so for a while she was using a neti pot every morning, one of those new edgy things where you rinse your sinuses with salt water. One day during her first period class, I think sophomore Spanish, a kid asks for help with a worksheet. So my mom walks over to his desk, bends over, and water pours out of her nose all over his paper, ruining the sheet. I guess you have to tip your head just right to get all the water out. She hasn't done the neti pot since then. Not a teacher, but I had a teacher who had a night job doing stand-up. After summer vacation, he was asking everyone what they did on their summer holidays. One kid lived on a farm and said he had spent the summer breeding horses. Teacher asked if he needed a chair. Don't remember exactly why, but I had to get a little stern with my class about timeliness. To drive my point home, I finished my rant with "the clock is right there" while pointing at the clock on the back wall. For reasons I'm still not sure of, my tongue just went paralyzed for a split second and I just decided to not pronounce the L in clock. Didn't have a whole lot of control of the class for the rest of the day. First day of school. In my first year teaching, I was sitting on a desk and going over the syllabus. The desk tipped out from under me, resulting in me falling off. I teach high school theater, and since it was the first day of class, the kids were dead silent. So I said, "Guys, laugh." That was hysterical, and they burst into laughter. What a way to break the ice. Edit, a word. I'm a 4th grade teacher, and before winter break my class was making ornaments to take home. They were simple glass balls that we filled with paint. We were starting to clean up and a few boys were still working on the ornaments on the other side of the room. I yelled over to them, "Name and name. Get your balls over here right now." As soon as I said it, I realized my mistake. I was not a teacher but a student in college. We were in the middle of an exam in my music class with around 40 students. I was sick at the time but made it to class to take the test. Felt my phone vibrate in my pocket and it was my girlfriend at the time. As I pulled my phone out of my pocket, it dropped and TRXT to speech was turned on. The most robotic woman voice started reading the message. She had texted me how she would take care of me and make me feel better, wrapping me up in a blanket. I grabbed the phone and ripped the battery out while the entire class got a good dose of robot cuddly talk. Super embarrassed at the time but quite a funny story to tell in hindsight. Not me, but years ago a third teacher I know was searching the internet for gnomes for a lesson on fairy tales and legends and got gay naked Orlando men's exchange on view for the whole class. That was an interesting conversation with the principal. I'm not a teacher but this happened to me when doing a presentation in college. Go to type YouTube to find a video used for my presentation. Accidentally typed RedTube instead. It popped up on the projector in front of 60 of my classmates. Whatever I draw on the board, no matter what it is, ends up looking like a D. I teach college biology. Here's a few examples of embarrassing moments. A few semesters I also taught PE. One day I packed a pair of translucent yellow gym shorts. I didn't realize they were translucent and showed my leopard print underwear until after teaching an entire step class. One of my students told me after talking about exercise, A student asked me why he shouldn't do the same weight training routine every day. I had recently been exchanging gym memes with some friends and said you have to let your it rest bro without thinking. He accepted the answer. I tried to make my own egg drop soup using onion soup mix. It gave me horrible gas right before class and I tried so hard to hold it in but ended up crop dusting my students a few times when trying to walk to the back of the room near the open door. I've had a few clothing mishaps. Bra snapped off during biology lab. Taught a class with my dress tucked into the back of my leggings. The leggings weren't sheer so nothing was exposed, but it just looked awkward and was obviously unintentional. Fly was down for an entire hour during a meeting with students. Misaligned shirt buttons a few times. One of my former students worked at the bar across from my house. She saw me have 2 different dates on 2 consecutive nights. And she saw me drunk a few times over the holidays semester breaks. Edit. Here's the yellow shorts incident. When I was a TA in university I used the washroom just before a lab started. Normally, I don't have any issues. This time I let out 2 drops after I zipped up. I also happened to be wearing light blue jeans. There was no way I could dry this in time and it was important I was there on time. There were about 20 first year students and they definitely noticed. I was the TA who peed himself. Other than the usual non-discreet crop dusting, a student of mine randomly asked me what I know about hobos. Now this student was definitely having some questions about his sexual orientation. In replying I accidentally said the following: "It is very sad that many homos have mental health issues." The second I realized I'd said homos, not hobos. I glanced furtively at the student, and we both knew what I had said. I powered on, and then proceeded to say homos again. I don't know what was going on in my mind that day. In middle school had a substitute calling of names for attendance. My friend's name is Ivana and when her name gets called the douchy kid in class goes, "Ivana duck your face." Right after the kid says that, the sub mispronounces the next name on the list which is no. Fun times were not had. Used to work as camp counselor. One time kids run up to me yelling that little Mike hit his head and is not moving. I ran after them and found the boy on the floor, limp, eyes closed. Quickly checked the boy into a safe position, checked pulse, breathing and ordered rest of the boys to go get the nurse now. Instead of doing as told, they stood around, grins on their faces. "Go get the duck, I nurse now you dumb its." And then Mike started laughing. And it all turned to be a practical joke. I was never so close to doing what Anakin did and slaughtering the younglings. After a while, you kind of lose your embarrassment sense. I teach at a low-level high school in Japan so I get a lot of it thrown at me. Thank God not literally. Most common thing is when I'm asking how many students are in a row so I can pass papers back. 6. Okay. 6. 6 people? Yes. 6 people. No. 6. Okay. 6. At this point a student usually smacks the offender over the head due to too much laughter. Also, one of the first years, 10th graders, learned the phrase "oh it" from God knows where. First week I got there, he lost to Janken, rock paper scissors, and proclaimed "oh it." I totally poker faced and pretended not to hear because I didn't want it to catch on. Of course it caught on. So these days, whenever we're playing a game and one of them loses, usually one boy starts with "oh it," and then it slowly cascades into a chorus of "oh it tt, it." And of course, there was the day in the same class where we were playing Simon Says. I told them to sit. Japanese does not have the C sound, so what do you think it became? My so had a class on Philippine fine arts. The professor made a thing online and informed the class to visit fapclassiforgotvisit.com. FAP equals Fine Arts Philippines, for those of you wondering. I'm not a teacher, I'm a student, but I think this story fits this thread well enough. So 2 years ago in environmental science class, we were watching a YouTube video about greenhouse gases, which is totally normal. However, our teacher was somewhat technologically incompetent and had autoplay turned on, and when the video was done she didn't realize another would play. So the video finishes, and she doesn't click out of the page and just talks about what we just watched. However, for some reason the next video that played was called 50 Orgasms a Day, and of course since we were a bunch of high school underclassmen, crowd control was nearly impossible. It was a good day. I was chatting to a student while my so Facebooked me. I saw his name pop up on my laptop screen. Half listening to the student, I replied, "Yes, my love." I looked up to a horrified 12-year boy's face. Also, a student brought fake LSD to school to freak her friends out. It was rice paper with stamps on it. I pointed out the fakeness of the LSD by going, "That doesn't look like anything I've seen. Full stop." Not a teacher but student. In biology class I was saying the octopus has testicles instead of tentacles. It was said more than once. Oh man, it makes me cringe. I am not a teacher, but this happened when I was in 8th grade. ME, where is Mrs. Oliver? Sub, she is sick today. ME, yes. I hate that itch. Sub, that itch is my wife. Yep. 8th grade me got totally whooped by an algebra sub, and Mrs. Oliver got the last laugh, giving me a righteous D that trimester. Substitute here. I have long given up on learning names for one-day jobs. I just call kids by the color of their shirt or jacket. I was teaching a high school woodshop class. The kids are usually cool, but pretty rowdy when forced to stay in a classroom instead of working on their projects. A guy in the back wearing a snap-on hoodie is extra talkative and really irritating me, because I was forced to babysit him. As I am about to tell him to shut up for the 20th time, I refer to him as, you guessed it, I strap on. Shut your hole. After that I just gave up and let them laugh talk for the remaining 30 minutes of class. I no longer had any authority or respect. Silver lining. Never had to see them again. So I'm not a teacher, but I was a grad student in a program with another grad student assigned to an 8th grade classroom. We went a couple days a week to teach lessons or just help the teacher. One day, my partner grad student was teaching and was talking about how these bears in Yellowstone got moved because they were acting erratically. He said it fine all day, but in one class he slipped and said they were acting erotically. The teacher and I noticed right away, and so did a couple students. He was good and gave a look but kept going. I was impressed. High school teacher here. My very first day of teaching. I mean very first day ever. I got nervous and rambly at one point and was talking about how technology has changed since I was their age and said, I bet most of you have never even seen a 3.5-inch floppy. I was teaching 6th grade English. I had really needed to fart for the entire class period, and as soon as all the kids were out of the room, I let one rip. Trouble is, I was erasing the board with my back to the room and didn't notice one of my students had stayed in to ask me a question. I know he heard it, but thankfully this was a good kid. He never said a word and we talked about his homework as if that had never happened. I know I must have been bright red during that entire conversation. I swear often, so kids get surprised. I explain that is better that they learn what to swear from a teacher than from one of their friends or Urban Dictionary. In ceramics you can apparently make something mixing the ashes of bones with clay. While talking about this, my ceramics professor said he didn't know what he was going to do with his wife, whom had long passed and whose ashes were in his closet. He said it in an odd way that kind of made the room silent. In my first semester of teaching community college, I was attempting to emphasize how important it was that they not miss the test. So I used a phrase one of my profs had used. To be approved for a makeup there had better be blood or death involved. And then a girl brought me an obituary for her dad and asked if she could miss the test for the funeral. I felt awful. Not me, but my band teacher in grade 6. He was ranting about how much he hated the fluorescent lights in the room and ended up shouting, "These fluorescent lights drive my nuts crazy," to a room full of 12-year-olds. Oof, I bombed once. I'm a music teacher, but this one particular summer I was working a music camp. I had a group of kids to make a band for a week. I had these two girls in a group of 5. One was skinny, one was large. I was explaining the basics of the instruments and I look the skinny one. Let's call her Ella and say the guitar has strings and they are very thin like you. I look at girl 2 and go, and this is the bass. It has fat string like. I froze. I couldn't finish the sentence. I had a solid 7 seconds of silence, desperately trying to find a word other than you. I didn't make it. I had to start talking about drums and not make eye contact for the remaining 5 hours. I am a Spanish teacher and we were working on vowel sounds and Spanish 1. It's like the third day of class and I give them the word Osamercy registered sign Lagusi because it has all the vowels in it, and before I give them the word I say okay. This next one I have for you is a really hard one. I should warn you it's a real mouthful and you might need to go slow at first. High school boys didn't make eye contact for a month after that. I turned beet red and wanted to die. I teach university biology labs and was covering for a class of students I do not normally teach. While working one-on-one with a student to help her figure out the lab, I involuntarily spit on her finger. Like, clear obvious bubble of saliva landed on her hand. We both just stared at it, horrified, until she slowly put her hand under the desk to wipe it on her pants. She got up and walked out of the class without saying a word. One of my teachers in 10th grade left her email open and when she went to project something to the class it showed one of her emails filled with her own nudes. She quit after that year. Well, upon hearing that a student, whom I had developed a good rapport with had become pregnant, I taught family consumer sciences, home economics. So guess who got to hear those stories? She told me about it and asked about finances during class. I taught a personal finance course. Loved it and quite enjoyed it myself. It students did not. I said a phrase which means that the life ahead is going to be difficult without thinking of what it means in most vernacular. The phrase was, well, student X, you've got a long row to hoe. Dead silence. Dare I say a pregnant silence? She looked quite offended until I quickly realized the misconception and explained what I meant. She and the rest of the class howled in laughter at my rushed apology. It became their favorite phrase the rest of the year. Not a teacher, but was a classmate. 1989 year 9 geography. We're all sitting there waiting for the teacher to arrive, who was a student's parent. There's the usual babble which happens to go quiet just as the super popular pretty girl with the much older boyfriend finishes her sentence with, "It tastes salty."